Jesus says, you are the salt. You are light. He does not say you could be salt or you could be light. No, Jesus, no bones about it. Jesus says to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. There is no getting out of this call. You see, Jesus has just begun his ministry in Galilee, an area that has been given to the Israel tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, which fulfilled the prophecy in Galilee of the Gentiles, light has dawned on people who sat in darkness. He has called his first disciples right as they stood doing their job fishing along the Sea of Galilee. Then he ministered to the crowds which followed him to Galilee and beyond. So Jesus goes to the mountain with his disciples and gives them a list of the Beatitudes that we heard last week. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who are meek, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who are merciful, pure in heart, the peacemakers and the persecuted. He laid out his plan and what God's kingdom would look like in the very broken world, in this very broken world, now and as a promised future. And now he gives his disciples two metaphors, salt and light. When you think about salt, what comes to mind? Is it a seasoning for food? Are you one of those people that puts a plate of food out on the table and immediately salts it before you've even tasted it? Do you sit around the table with anyone who cooks and they'll tell you salt is crucial in their kitchen? Have you ever accidentally left salt out of a dish? On the other hand, when you hear about salt, it's not hard to think about all the warnings that we've received from doctors on eating too much salt to reduce our salt intake. However, that being said, our bodies also need salt. If you've ever gotten dehydrated, a doctor will tell you you need to have salty food. Our bodies need salt. It helps control your fluid balance and control the way your muscles and nerves work. Jesus gives his disciples the courage to believe they can elicit goodness on earth, like salt, which is used to enhance or alter the taste of food, which otherwise would be very bland and tasteless. Because he knows the disciples have this capacity to elicit goodness as they participate in the earth, and they'll have profound consequences. They will care for those who suffer loss. They will seek to do justice and show mercy. They will be the peacemakers. They will have integrity and courage to stand for what they believe. Disciples who did not engage in this practice, Jesus says, will be like salt that has lost its taste. The line that says, when it's no longer good, you'll throw it out and trample on it. I find that to be a funny line, given that many of us have probably thrown a handful of salt on many a sidewalk this winter, hoping to melt some ice. Nonetheless, he gives it to us. And then moves on to the second metaphor, you are the light of the world. Have you ever walked into a truly, truly dark room? No windows, no emergency light hanging on the wall. It's dark. I am so glad that our cell phones now contain flashlights because I've had to use it in these dark rooms. And when I do, I'm reminded that light breaks through the darkness and darkness cannot overcome it. You see, light enables us to see things. It has a kind of energy that gives color to a room, but it also helps vegetation grow. It provides solar power. Like light, the disciples, as a gathered community, have the overall purpose of being a mirror that can reflect and refract God's light, so all people can see and know God's justice and mercy in a broken world. Jesus is encouraging his disciples and his followers to bring that light into a very broken and dark world. The light is the light of the gospel. This has been the mission from the very beginning. However, in order for that light of the gospel to be seen, we have to be willing to admit there is darkness. We have to be willing to go where the darkness exists, to engage and walk through it, so that in time the light can overcome the darkness in our lives, in our communities, and in our world. Salt and light. Why would Jesus use these metaphors to encourage his disciples as part of the Sermon on the Mount? Is it because salt and light do not exist for their own benefit? And we do not exist for our own benefits, for our own needs, but rather we are called to be disciples, created in the image of God, to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. That's done by modeling Jesus' love and forgiveness and to be in community with one another. As the salt of the earth, we as Jesus' disciples, we allow ourselves and our characters to be formed by God's blessings. Yesterday, I was having lunch with some friends. We were celebrating one of our friends' birthdays. But while we were sitting there gathered around the table in the restaurant, we lamented the death of by suicide of one of our other friends who died this past spring. She would have been sitting at that table with us. As we were talking about this, one of our friends recently had gone to a conference. And she said, one of the key things that you can do to help others is to have a 3 a.m. friend. The friend that you could call at 3 a.m. and they won't question your sanity. The 3 a.m. friend who will be there to give you a ride if your car has broken down. A friend you can call when the world is unfair to you. A friend you can call at 3 a.m. just because. That 3 a.m. friend, if you will, I think is being one's light and salt in the world. You need them. You need them like you need salt in grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe. You need a 3 a.m. friend like a light in a dark room. This particular group of 5 friends have grown closer over the years because we've attended Bible studies together. We've annually attended the National IF Gathering locally. In early March, Olivet will be hosting the IF Gathering for women. Perhaps you've seen the article in the emblem. IF is a live-streamed national conference out of Austin, Texas. We gather locally, not just to watch the live stream, and to hear these nationally known authors and Bible teachers share their own faith journey. But the beauty of gathering locally and as a community and as a group to hear these speakers is we gather around tables and we discuss our own faith and how we are living out our lives as disciples. During a recent past IF gathering, the women speaking reminded us that Jesus began with a relatively small number of disciples, 12. He did not have 575,000 followers on Facebook. And by the way, there actually is a Facebook account named Jesus Christ. I'm not kidding you. No, Jesus started with 12 ordinary men who were fishing, and he called them to be disciples, his disciples. Those IF gathering speakers focused on the early days. Jesus began with a few. Jesus began with relationships, meeting people one at a time where they were. The disciples were about devoting themselves to Jesus' teachings, not their own. They were breaking bread and praying with one another. They were each other's 3 a.m. friends. Jesus is our 3 a.m. friend. Often, I think, we like to think about the big picture. How many likes can we get? How many people attended an event? We become distracted by big things. because we want big things to happen for ourselves, for our community, for our family and friends, and for our church. But what if we shifted back to God's model? What if we were to go smaller, deeper, and quieter? What if we were to go smaller by meeting and discussing our faith with just one person? What if we were to change our habits and disciplines to include more time to go deeper in the Word of God? What if we cut out the noise of this world and took more time to be in silence, to hear God in our own lives? What if your goal this week was to read the Bible more than the news? John Lewis, the author of Across That Bridge, A Vision for Change in the Future of America, says this: "Every change in the world begins with you. It begins with one individual who envisions his or her micro-universe the way it can be and settles for nothing less. And as one individual moves towards the light, that light ignites more individual flames. And eventually, the revolutionary inner work becomes a transformative outer work that builds into a bonfire of light, the kind of light that can change this world. It starts from within, with one individual who is seeking the way of Jesus Christ, peace, love, and forgiveness. Will you be that one person? It's about living with a life focused on who Jesus is and who Jesus is calling us to be, who Jesus wants me to be and Jesus wants you to be. It's about relationships. Think about the many ways we are salt and light for one another. We are people that love Jesus. That's what we should care about, is loving Jesus and loving one another. As the light of the world, we are followers of Jesus. And by doing that, we accept the call to speak his word to all people, even if that means we're disliked or we're persecuted. During a Bible study on this text, a woman shared how years ago her family was in a dark place. Tragedy had struck her family, and in their grief, they were handling it all differently. And that resulted in fights between one another. Well, she called them together for their family dinner. They had the usual feast. After they were done eating, she pulled out an envelope which contained a slip of paper for each family member. Her family was concerned she was going to give them some bad news. But instead, on each slip of paper, she had written Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. As she handed them the piece of paper, she told them it was time to set aside their differences, and they needed to rely on God. She brought light, the light of God's gospel, into a very dark time for her family. Well, over the years, anytime a family member sends a card for a birthday or just thinking of you, guess what's written on it? Proverbs 3, 5 through 6. It has become their family code, erasing away the anger, helping with the grief. Salt and light do not exist for our own benefit. The local community of disciples does not exist for itself, but rather to model God's reign of mercy, love, and forgiveness. I want you to think about all of the people you have touched in your faith journey. And think of who we, as all of it, are bringing God's love, mercy, and forgiveness to. We are the salt and the light. We are called to continue to be the light in someone's life in the darkest of times. We are called to be the salt that does not lose its strength against this world's chaos. Be the salt. Be the light. Amen.